Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mythicast, the podcast about grinding to Mythic on MTG Arena. I'm your host, Spencer, and I am joined by a special guest this week at MTG Deck Tech himself, Marcel. How's it going, Marcel?
Very nice. Looking forward to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today and to be talking about a best of one deck, something we haven't talked about on this podcast today. I really appreciate you jumping on this all the way from overseas in Germany. It means a lot to have kind of a worldwide presence going on here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I hope my English will carry me through.
Your
But
your
yeah,
English is great. I've been talking to you for 5 minutes. I feel like you've had zero problems. My German is not great. I only know how to say "I love you" in German. So my
at least something.
yeah, well, I guess I know how to say hello too. But yeah, my family is actually my grandmother's mother is immigrant from Germany. So we have like we have lots of German food in my house. So uh,
German food isn't that great, so I
ah,
much rather prefer American
whoa,
food.
I love German. We have a German place down here in Utah that is has won many awards. It's a German deli that's very good. So I don't know. You guys like meat and potatoes. Those are my favorite things. well,
Yeah, that's true.
you know who else loves meat and potatoes is our sponsors over at puremtg.com. Check them out. Go over there, check them out. They're the place to get content if you're trying to improve at online Magic. So check them out over at puremtg.com. They mean a lot to us. Yeah. So before we get too far into this, Marcel, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Like, how long have you been playing Magic? Tell me about, all the times you've grinded at Mythic. Let's hear a little bit about
Yeah.
you.
So yeah, I'm fairly new to the game. I've started with Ravnica Allegiance. I only played Magic Arena until now, so I'm one of the new players that have come to Magic through this venue. And yeah, I've been Mythic now 3 months. So once with a normal red deck with experimental frenzy and stuff like that. Once with mono black aggro before it was cool, so to say. So that was two months ago or something. And once with oh man, I think I'm just four times I was Mythic. So once with Boros Feather, and last month I got there with a combination of mono black, Simic Flash, and the red deck we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you on, man. It's nice to have the new blood from Arena joining into the MTG ranks. It's really cool to have seen the Magic community both grow and honestly just get better at Magic through Arena. So that being said, let's actually talk about your journey to Mythic this month. One of the decks that we're going to talk about today is a best of one Cavalcade red deck. But you play a lot of different decks to get to Mythic. Why don't you kind of talk about your journey to Mythic overall? What kind of decks did you play against on your way, through the time this month since the set has dropped?
Yeah, since the set is dropped, I only played the Cavalcade deck. Before that, I played a lot in the standard 2020 event, just because I didn't have many of the cards of Ixalan, so I couldn't play like vampires or something, and it got annoying to always lose against this deck. And so I played a lot of standard 2020, which I think helped me to get used to the rotation. I played Simic Flash there, and also played Mono Black. These were the most decks I played. I tried some Gates decks, but that didn't really work for me. I'm a bit of an impatient player, so I like me some aggro decks.
Sure.
And yeah, these were the decks that worked pretty well in the standard 2020 event. But when I saw Torbrand coming out, I thought to myself, I always enjoyed the Cavalcade deck, and I have to try it for this season. And it worked very well in Mythic. So
What was the 2020 meta like, and how does it differ from the current best of one meta that you got to play against now?
it's hard to say at the moment. I think the first taste were people trying out some new deck tech from Eldraine, of course. Seen a lot of new decks, most of the time Simic Food or something like that. But at the moment, I'm not really sure where the meta is heading yet, because now people are starting to play the old decks again. I've seen a lot of Field of the Dead decks. Not really sure yet how this deck compares to those decks, but Yeah, we'll see in the next days, I think, when the meta settles more.
And is with you playing mostly best of one, does do you watch things like the SCG circuit or the even things like the MPL to kind of get ideas, or is the meta so different for you that you kind of have to forge your way on your own?
I do play most of the MPL decks. I like to try them when I see them. Uh, I'm always trying to play some control decks. I always find out I'm not good at it, but maybe someday I will find one. But yeah, I think the best of one meta is pretty different just because people are playing different things than on the MPL. So many more people play aggressive decks, I think, and yeah, you don't see that much of a controlling style most of the time when you play best of one. This is, I think, a big difference even to best of three, which I played some of, but not really that much.
Okay. Well, let's actually jump into your deck today. I'm going to pull that up on the screen for those watching at home, and I'm just going to read the deck list off really quick for those listening. We have 4 Fervent Champion, 1 Scorchbitter, 4 Tin Street Dodger, 1 Torch Courier, 2 Chandra Spitfire, 1 Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, 1 Legion Warboss, 4 Tolbran of the Red Veil, 4 Chandra Acolyte of Flame, 4 Shock, 2 Chandra's Triumph, 4 Light Up the Stage, 2 Chandra's Regulator, 4 oh my gosh, I can't say it. Cavalcade of Calamity, 2 Castle Embreth, and 20 Mountains.
Yes.
So I have a question kind of before we get into this deck tech. So one of the first things that I saw looking at this deck was 2 Chandra Spitfire and 1 Scorch Spitter. You're kind of moving away from Scorch Spitter in favor of Fervent Champion. Why don't you talk about that for me?
Yeah, I've only one Scorch Splitter in the deck, mainly because I use it as a distraction, because I think it's a very overrated card in this deck. Of course, it has a built-in Cavalcade, so it synergizes well with Torbrand and also the Cavalcade to get even more triggers. But as it doesn't have haste, I don't value it that highly, and sometimes I just play it to draw a shock from my opponent or something like that. When it works, it's nice, but I like the Fervent Champion more because is it has haste, it has first strike, which are very nice in the early game, and it also has it can pump itself if you have 2 of them. So you have the Cavalcade triggers before that, and then you get 2 power creatures that are attacking, which can be very nice. If you draw 2 in your opening hand, this can get out of hand very quickly. So I like the Fervent Champion even more. Even though I don't use the equipment clause on the card at all, I tried with the big red equipment spell, which with Embercleave, I think it was.
Yeah.
But it just didn't. It seemed like a win more card, so I cut that out at some point.
Yeah, it also looks like one of the things that you're doing here is you're kind of going for having a longer game plan rather than having something like Bone Crusher Giant or things like that. You actually have 4 Chandra, 2 Chandra's Regulator, and Chandra's Triumph to kind of deal with some of the larger problems, in addition to having that long game with Chandra.
Yeah, Chandra's Regulator is one of the cards I underestimated the most, I think, when I built this deck. It seems like it shouldn't be that great in an aggro deck, but the amount of times it just saved me by getting me new cards, getting rid of those mountains, and getting some new threats, and also with the Chandra Acolyte of Flames trigger. It helps so much. This card this is one of the best cards in the deck, sneakily, and people tend to underestimate it. So I'm very happy to have 2 of them. I'm even thinking about maybe playing 3 of them, but I wouldn't know what to get rid of. So it's a very nice card.
Do you find that one of the reasons that you like this card specifically in Best of One, is just that you don't have more games to go through, so the ability to get rid of excess mountains actually gives you an advantage over other red decks?
Yeah, it's also most of the times when I play aggro decks, or at least with the red decks, I used to play like 20 mountains or something. But with Torbrand in the deck and Torbrand being so important, I felt like 22 lands was better. And yeah, of course you're gonna flood at some point when you have more lands. And to get rid of them, it's nice to have the regulator.
Well, let's talk really quickly about the mana. You have 20 mountains and 2 castle Embereth. Is how strong is castle in this deck? I mean, you talked about Fervent Champion's first strike. That has to be relevant with castle.
Yeah, Castle, it's not really that strong. I have it in there maybe to have some activation at some point, but I haven't really used it that much. So most of the times when you could cast the activation, you already have enough board state to win the game. So it's
Interesting.
not that impactful in the deck. I just have it in there to have the option to do something. If some specific case comes to pass, I always like to have some options. That's why I
Sure.
play a lot of one-offs in the deck also. It's just my play style, I guess.
So, you just think that it's just better than the 21st and 22nd mountain then?
Yeah, it doesn't really have a downside. So I used to have the Dwarf mine, I think it's named, which makes the 1/1, which seems to be good in the deck, but you need 3 mountains on the field. So
Right.
it's most of the times it just gets into the field tapped, and you can't have that in this kind of deck. So I swapped it out with the castle and tried a bit around with that.
Okay.
And at least it didn't hurt. It sometimes helped, but most of the times it's just a mountain.
Well, let's talk about the one drop creatures really quickly. We've already talked about Scorch Bitter and Fervent Champion, but you also have 4 Tin Street Dodger and 1 Torch Courier. Talk to me about kind of why you picked Tin Street Dodger over maybe something like Ginger Brute, and Torch Courier over something like Ginger Brute.
Yeah, Ginger Brute seems to be a very okay card for this deck. I always thought about maybe bringing in 1 or 2 of them, but it isn't a red card, so it doesn't get pumped by the Tor brand, which is basically why I decided against it. Tin Street Dodger is just, I think, the best 1 drop because it doesn't die to blockers if you use its abilities, so it's very nice to have that to keep your board state. And the Torch Carrier is something that is almost the opposite to the Scorch Splitter because I think most people underestimate it. It most of the time it's just an okayish card because you can't use the ability, but when you can use it, it's very strong. If you can give the Chandra Spitfire haste, for example, and you have Cavalcade on the field, you can pump the Chandra for much power in the first round. And the same goes for Krenko and sometimes Legion Warboss. So it's a very niche application, but when it works, it's very impactful. It sometimes can just outright win you the game.
Well, we've talked about Torbrand quite a bit. Let me read this card for those who don't know what it does. It's red, red, red 1 for a 2/4 legendary Dwarf Noble. If a red source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2. So this is a card that, really drew you into this deck. I mean, you're playing Tin Street Dodger, you're playing Fervent Champion, you're playing all these red 1 drops. It makes your Chandras really good. It makes your Spitfires really good. Talk to me about, just how much damage this thing is getting in.
Yeah, this is amazing, especially if you combine it with Cavalcade. If you have Cavalcade and Torbrand on the field, you can sometimes just win at turn 4, which is something I haven't really seen in Standard that much. So it just pumps everything. It can do so much in the deck. It makes every attack hurt more. It makes your shocks hurt more. It makes your Chandra's Triumph hurt more. Just to have the option to have something else than Cavalcade. If you don't draw your Cavalcade, you can still win the game with Torbrands, pumping your whole creatures and just attacking your opponent's face. It works a lot of times. If you have both of them, it's almost game over for the opponent. It's just that powerful to have 3 damage instead of 1 damage.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you sent me this deck list, the first thing I noticed is, of course, no experimental frenzies, no steam can. Why don't you talk about that really quickly? You've really gone all in on Torbrand, and you think that that is the correct way to build these red decks.
Yeah, I think because you build with the Torbrand, it's 4 mana. It's very easy to miss on Experimental Frenzy. If you have like a Torbrand on the top of your deck and you don't have the 4 mana, it would be a very, very bad thing. It's always worse. It's always bad enough to have the Experimental Frenzy hitting other Experimental Frenzies. So yeah, never really considered it for this deck. I think the card draw from Light of the Stage and from Chandra's Regulator is enough to get the pieces that you need, and an Experimental Frenzy would just reduce the flexibility. I think this deck has some sneaky flexibility and some sneaky late game power, which the Experimental Frenzy would not be a part of, I think.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think that you've kind of built, as you've talked about your deck, I think you've constructed it in the way that you believe is best for Cavalcade and Tolbrand. I mean, Chandra's Regulators are a really interesting addition. Having your Chandra's Triumphs over something like Lava Coil to deal with large creatures because you're playing so many Chandras is really interesting. Can you kind of talk to me about Light Up the Stage overall? Like, is it as good in this deck as it is in the other decks? Do you find that that it kind of really gets you to the pieces that you want? I mean, you have a lot of one ofs in this deck. Is Light Up the Stage helpful in that regard?
Yeah, it's not really because of the one-ups. It's just you don't have any other way of really drawing more cards
Sure.
each turn. So I think it's in every mono red aggro deck. It's Light of the Stage. You have four of in. It's not really something I thought about because
You
yeah,
shouldn't. Yeah.
it's really the only card you have. And yeah, sometimes you hit a Torbrand without having 4 mana, which is very, very bad. But most of the times you just get your mountain that you need, your cards that you need, and it's really easy to proc because you have shocks, you have the Tint Street Dodger that can just go to your opponent's face, you have the Cavalcade activation, so it's never a problem to cast it at spectacle cost in this deck.
Talk to me about Kranko and Legion Warboss. What kind of roles do those cards fill in this deck?
Yeah, those were cards I shuffled around a lot, like playing more of them or playing less of them. Because of course they do make some 1/1s. Kranko can make really, really many of them. Legion Warboss is a bit quicker, so it's a bit of a trade-off between those two. But in the end, I just came to the realization that the Chandra Planeswalker just is better than those cards at making tokens fast. And in combination with Chandra's Regulator, it can make 4 tokens each turn. And yeah, that's overall more powerful, but I like to have some other options in case my opponent is very anti-Planeswalker or something like that, which you can find sometimes in best of one. You can always have opponents that play some kind of strange strategy, and it's always nice to have another option.
What decks do you want to play against the most when you're playing this deck?
It's very good against most of the decks I encountered. I have some of the decks I definitely don't want to play against, namely Simic Flash. Just seems to totally destroy this deck. And Esper can be difficult if your opponent draws the right removal spells. Sweepers in general are of course very bad against this, or very good against this. And yeah, those are the decks I don't want to play against. But most of the time, it's rather dependent on whether I draw or whether I'm on the play. This deck has a very large disparity in win rate. So I think it was about 70% on play and 40% on draw. So it's a very dependent deck on that, which I couldn't really get rid of. So it's just,
Sure.
I think, the name of the game here with this deck.
Do you have anything that you do specifically that you think, do you have a strategy for the Esper matchup that you think helps?
Well, it's with the Esper, it's just what you do against most decks. Just try to beat them down before they can get their good stuff on the battlefield.
Sure.
Get rid of the Teferis, which are not that bad in this matchup. They can be a bit annoying, but Teferi only being a bit annoying is better than against most decks. With Simic Flash, for example, it just kills your whole strategy.
Sure.
So it doesn't really counter you that much. And yeah, the Dance of the Man's decks, I think, take some time to get going, and you have a window to be proactive and just kill them.
Awesome. Cool. Is there anything else you want to say on this deck before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think it's just a very fun deck. I like playing it. It's very nice if you want to get a lot of games under your belt. So I played like 100 games in one day with that, no problem. And yeah, that's just a very nice, very fast deck if you are impatient like me and want to win your games fast.
Well, there you go. So, if you are you going to be playing this deck in the 12 win event here today?
Yeah, I think I'm going to, and I record that. So let's see how that goes. I'm not sure if it will work, but yeah, I'll try my best.
Well, if people want to see that recording, where can they check out your content?
Yeah, they can search me on YouTube. It's also MTG Deck Tech. You can find me there, and I will upload that probably tomorrow or something like that. And yeah, they can find me.
Awesome. Well, this will go up today. So if this is a deck you want to give a run through over in that 12 win event before after this episode goes up, would you recommend it for everybody else?
Yeah, yeah. If you're good at playing aggro decks, I think you can come to this deck pretty quickly. I played like one normal game with it and already got into Mythic ranked and just won my first 10 games with it. So it's not really something that's too hard to learn, but there are some perks of it you can master and just give your spin on it. And yeah, I think it's a very nice deck to get into fast and play right away.
Awesome. Well, Marcel, thank you so much for coming on. You can follow Marcel over at MTG Deck Tech, MTG underscore Deck Tech on Twitter. You can find me at Spencer13H. You can find the podcast over at Arena Mythic Cast. Don't forget to check out the rest of the Constructive Criticism Network. We believe in always improving on the show. It sounds like Marcel's been doing a lot of that, getting Mythic every month, tuning his decks. It's really awesome to hear. Thank you, Marcel, once again, so much for coming on, and we'll talk to everybody next week with another episode of Mythic Cast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.